Looking good.
My body is ready.
299.
Let's get this nonsense started.
The Electronic Entertainment Expo, Video Game Christmas, the Annual Gamer Cringe-Fest Jamboree, whatever you call it, there's a good chance you're familiar with E3 if you have even a passing interest in those funny interactive pixels. Since its inception in 1995, it quickly rose to become the biggest gaming event of the year for industry insiders and regular fans alike. Entire development cycles and marketing strategies were built to fit around just one manic week in June. Games media would forget what it was to sleep, and fanatics would be fighting in forums over who won the whole thing. No matter what changed, E3's existence has been the one reliable constant, never in doubt, a fundamental, unbreakable law of the universe, like gravity, time, or Peter Molyneux's compulsive lies. But one day, we collectively woke up and realized it had been missing for 4 years. Well done, guys. You broke gravity. The last so-called normal E3 was in 2019, featuring all of the hits, a new console tease, updates for long-awaited titles, bombshell sequel surprises, celebrity cameos from Keanu and friends, and of course, the mandatory Ubisoft dance routine. 4 years on, 2 cancellations and a half-hearted digital show later, E3 was all set for a proper reunion in 2023. Except all the publishers, including the big 3 console competitors, decided they were too busy washing their hair that week. Faced with such a comprehensive no-show, E3 confirmed on the 30th of March that, regrettably, the party was over. So, what changed? What world-altering event could have possibly uprooted such a long-standing institution? Well, yes, obviously there's the thing that kept us inside for over a year, but the problems go much deeper and much further back than that. Let's find out who stole our video game Christmas and why. It all started back in 1995, born out of the game industry's frustration at their treatment by the Consumer Electronics Show, the big trade event of its day. Seriously, the gaming section was relegated to a tent outside the venue, next to the portaloos, and behind the porn section. Disgusting! Naturally, many old heads were skeptical that a dedicated video game trade show could succeed, but they were proven very, very wrong. Since then, the show has gone from strength to strength, evolving from dry, business-focused presentations into the glossy, trailer-laden spectacles we know and love. Every year, players, publishers, and PR firms alike would circle June in their calendars, readying themselves for an exhilarating and exhausting week of announcements, gameplay, and on-stage goofs. It was a simpler time, until the first warning sign in 2011, when the old guard of gaming, Nintendo, started experimenting with their own Nintendo Direct streams. Despite their early skepticism, Nintendo had since been a mainstay of the expo, so when they decided to skip the presentation part of E3 in 2013, it sent shockwaves through the industry. They'd still have a presence on the showroom floor with booths, playable demos, and the like, but they realized a pre-recorded presentation would lead to a slicker, more streamlined performance for the wider public. Rest in peace, Wii Music. This was the first slow leak that eventually led to the floodgates bursting open, with EA, Sony, and Microsoft branching off to their own shows or venues in subsequent years. By 2019, E3 still had an air of glitz and glamour when viewed from afar, but much like a hastily assembled stage backdrop, it was barely held together with sticky tape and positive vibes upon closer inspection. You know what else happened in 2019? We released a video about E3 dying out. Now, we don't want to say we told you so, but since nobody watched the video the first time, we are holding you personally responsible for E3's fate after ignoring our very legitimate doom-mongering, okay? Basically, following 2019, E3's chances of survival drastic went down. 2020's show was cancelled for obvious reasons. Then in 2021, E3 had a rather muted return with streamed presentations and a lackluster online booth experience. 2022 was cancelled partially due to COVID concerns, but also to help the ESA refocus towards a glorious return to the full physical event the following year. Good job the 2023 event was worth the wait. Right, guys? What do you mean nobody bothered to show up this year? What am I supposed to do with 60,000 party hats? Oh my god, the rent is so expensive. Plenty of factors led to E3's sad decline, but we'll start with the obvious problem. It's difficult to host a show when nobody turns up. We've mentioned Nintendo's absence from 2013 onwards, but this only really applied to the big flashy conference the public watches while typing their snarky comments into live chats. Plenty of attendees to the Los Angeles event could still get their dose of Nintendo on the show floor, even at the last proper E3 in 2019. In February 2023, however, Nintendo pulled out of that arrangement too, stating it didn't fit into their plans. The timing wasn't ideal, as the show would happen just after Tears of the Kingdom's huge release, leaving Nintendo with little else to promote in its place. Sony's last appearance was at 2018, as the following year they dropped out from both the conference and the show floor, allegedly due to doubts about whether E3 was really necessary for the industry anymore. See? Sony saw it coming too, which means we're at least as smart as Jim Ryan or Kenichiro Yoshida. Microsoft have been the other reliable mainstay of modern E3, but in 2018 they packed their bags and travelled all the way to a far-flung exotic destination of just across the street. There they are. The Microsoft Theatre was a more modernised venue than the aging LA Convention Centre, with extra space not just for their main conference, but also more booth space and capacity for attendees. Xbox was still basically at E3 during E3 week, just technically at a different address. However, in March 2023, Microsoft were the last of the big hitters to confirm their exit from the show floor, and while their online showcase would still happen during E3 week, this left the ESA in an embarrassing position. They'd hyped up this triumphant return since last year, cancelling 2022 to focus on a freshly revitalised show, and they'd even enlisted help from events company ReedPop to make it a real barn burner. But by this point, the big companies were too burnt out on E3 to care. By the end of March, other major publishers like Sega, Tencent and Ubisoft struck the final nails in the coffin, confirming their absences. Rather savagely, Ubisoft chose to throw their own party, Ubisoft Forward, in the same week as E3 in the same city. It's ironic, really. All those years ago, the games industry left CES behind because they knew they'd do a better job themselves. And now, individual games companies are doing the exact same thing to E3. Nintendo might be over-reliant on nostalgia, but you've got to hand it to the old dogs. They saw this trend coming a mile off. In 2011, Nintendo trialled their first ever Direct, a historic event not just for the moment Reggie Fils-Aimé softly berates viewers who don't own a 3DS.
What's wrong with you?
But also for the change it represented in how companies promoted their biggest releases. Coincidentally, 2011 also saw the launch of Twitch, this crazy offshoot of Justin TV created specifically for streaming that niche little hobby called video games. Both events have had huge ripple effects on gaming, especially the streamlining of streaming tech, which changed how players not only consumed content, but became creators and influencers in their own right. And slowly but surely, publishing bigwigs started catching on, realizing they were no longer bound to traditional means of communication to promote their new toys. They could be much more direct, Nintendo Direct, if you will. Obviously, the transition of games media from print to website was already well established by 2011, so it's not like we're talking about the slow, laborious monthly magazine cycle of ye olden times, but by hosting their own pre-packaged showcase of new game trailers, hardware and news updates, Nintendo proved that getting their message out instantly to fans could happen even quicker and entirely on their own schedule. You didn't have to build your entire marketing strategy around just one or two key points in the year, like June's E3 or later the Game Awards in December. You can show off cool new things whenever you have cool new things to show off. Equally, you don't have to rush to an arbitrary June deadline just because some people in 1995 thought that'd be a good time for a yearly shindig. Then there's the natural advantage of having a controlled environment when hosting your own show, as opposed to the hectic, pressurized atmosphere of E3. Whether the format is a pre-recorded video like Nintendo's Direct, or a more relaxed live stream presentation, you can minimize the risk of looking rather silly in front of a live studio audience. Self-hosted shows aren't immune from embarrassment, of course, as cringe factor can still reach critical levels, but with this approach, we're much less likely to see a complete train wreck akin to Konami's entire E3 presentation in 2010. Great news for publishers, bad news for cringe connoisseurs. Then of course you have the reduced costs associated with doing a presentation in-house, where you can budget to whatever you can manage instead of being pressured into a full-on Hollywood event just to stand out in the crowd during a jam-packed week of announcements. And that's just considering the costs of conference-style shows. There's another very expensive side to E3 that's been allowed to run rampant for years. Do you remember when E3 was meant to be a trade show, a place to meet peers, pitch your games to publishers or distributors, and wow the hype-fueled media with flashy booths and slick demos? Well, like all schmoozy networking events, this costs money, and quite a lot of it. Exactly how much is a closely guarded secret by the ESA, but that hasn't stopped some brave souls from lifting the veil at least a smidge. According to Engadget, Semi-Formal Studios nabbed a 600 square foot space on the E3 show floor in 2013 and spent $100,000 on the whole thing. We're talking floor space rental, booth construction, equipment, travel, the full shebang. That's not exactly pocket change, but apparently that's the extreme low end of the scale. Without their own meticulous planning and clever cost cutting, Semi-Formal believed it likely could have cost somewhere between $300,000 to $500,000. For context, these are 2013 prices for the smallest possible space available. For humble indies and smaller publishers, that's a substantial wedge of cash, and even then, there's every chance of being overshadowed by a massive eyesore of a booth from EA or the like. By comparison, how much would a big shot like EA throw away on a 3-day party? We'd asked them ourselves, but the last time we tried to contact supervillain CEO Andrew Wilson, his only response was, "How did you get into my lair?" and "Get your peasant hands off that doomsday device." Such a diva, honestly. Luckily, in 2016, the publication Elite Gamer had a fair stab at estimating costs based on previously drip-fed figures. The finer details are well worth seeking out, but in essence, a space of roughly 22,000 square feet with associated build costs will set you back about $1.5 million. Absolutely silly money. You know, we know there's a disgusting amount of money in the games industry, £7 billion in the UK market alone and roughly $380 billion worldwide, but even with EA's disposable income, $1.5 million for a few days in a crowded convention centre seems like a poor investment. Not only is Los Angeles an expensive place to travel and stay, but the LA Convention Centre charges obscene figures for the rights to use its aging venue, really putting the con in convention. And naturally, these extortionate prices all get passed down to the attendees too. In 2017, E3 was open to the general public for the first time in a bid to boost attendance after a dip the previous year and no doubt to recoup some of the insane rental costs. That year, 15,000 tickets were available, with the first 1,000 going for $149 each and the rest costing $249 a pop. That's around $3.6 million made back, or roughly 2.4 EA booths. This felt like a final, official admission of the thing we'd known for years. E3's transformation from industry-exclusive, business-centric trade event to a giant consumer-facing advert was complete. In their hubris, E3 priced out the little guys who would benefit the most from this environment of discovery, and they alienated the big guys who could easily put on their own grand show and probably still save a few bucks. Despite all this, we'd probably still be buying up E3 tickets if it weren't for a certain global incident. When COVID reared its ugly head just a few months before E3 2020, the ESA had no option but to cancel the event rather than turn the LA Convention Center into the world's largest petri dish full of deadly virus. The following year was filled with just as much uncertainty, and while E3's digital-only event in 2021 was a fair compromise in a rapidly changing world, it simply wasn't the same. But COVID's impact on E3 went far beyond a couple of cancelled events. The long-term aftershock of the pandemic, along with other global factors, has led to worldwide inflation in most developed countries and sharply rising costs in a large number of industries. Everyone from your Auntie Liz to Acty Blizz are tightening their purse strings, so a ludicrously overpriced week in LA isn't exactly a top priority right now, is it? Gaming hasn't been immune to this global downturn, but in fairness, it hasn't been disastrous either. Hardware scarcities led to long-term graphics card shortages and production issues for next-gen consoles, but software sales shot up during lockdown, what with everyone suddenly having a lot more free time. It was only after things started returning to normal that game sales started to dip, but only slightly. Figures still remained above pre-pandemic levels, but this post-lockdown come-down was enough, of course, to panic shareholders with dangerously short memories. As well as an inability to attend or host public-facing events, this elevated penny pinching likely played a factor in the increased surge of self-hosted presentations, along with the disgusting amount of recent staff layoffs and cuts, because heaven forbid CEOs like your boy Bobby K take a slight decrease in that $150 million pay slip, right? On a less depressing note, the pandemic led to people challenging some long-established game industry norms, potentially for the better. For many, working from home began as a necessity but quickly became ideal, cutting out lengthy, expensive commutes, leaving more time to spend with their families, and specifically for game developers, it meant a way out from traditional crunch culture. And with no more annual release cycle of E3 promotion in the summer to drive hype for the winter releases, rinse and repeat ad nauseum, the curse was finally broken. While remote working certainly led to more delays, this shouldn't be framed as a negative. Studios resetting to quote-unquote normal working hours means happier developers, which means better games for all. Studios were more confident about taking their time to get things right, and once they did have something to show the class, the necessities of the pandemic proved how easy it was to host their own shows and live streams. Things were trending this way anyway, but lockdown accelerated this process dramatically, making E3 increasingly obsolete. But wait! Who's that figure? The ominous man who's been circling the slowly dying corpse of E3 for some time, flanked by his best friend and confidant Hideo Kojima. Let's take a closer look. Look! It's the Game Award himself, Jeff Keighley. And, it says here to hold for applause. That is? Okay, good. Now, we're not accusing the hardest working host in gaming of any nefarious wrongdoings, but his alibi for the night of E3's murder was shaky at best, and then he tweeted this about 2 minutes later, essentially saying, "Lol, rip E3, now go watch Summer Games Fest, you bozos." Come on, Jeffrey, the body wasn't even cold yet, for God's sake. Of course, we're using Jeff as a representative of a wider point: increased competition in the gaming convention space. Jeff Keighley founded the Game Awards in 2014. That's 1 year after Nintendo bailed on E3 for any timeline enthusiasts, and while it officially positioned itself as your typical industry-specific awards show, it also featured all the bells and whistles of a standard E3 presentation. Lots of glossy trailers for upcoming titles, exclusive new reveals and world premieres, celebrity guests and developer interviews, and even live performances from huge musical artists. This was another early shot across the bows of E3 years before anyone uttered the words Pan D, and I hope they never utter them again. In 2019, Jeff then launched Gamescom Opening Night Live with a similar glitzy vibe to the Game Awards, and the following year, when everyone else was cancelling plans, your man Jeffrey launched Summer Game Fest, a series of digital events that has evolved into its own physical show for the first time in 2023. It's not just a one-man monopoly on gaming shows, however. One of the oldest E3 comparable events is Tokyo Game Show, which has been going since 1996 and has traditionally been the other major gaming showcase for breaking news, reveals, and trailers, with over 270,000 people attending. By comparison, E3's attendance in 2019 was a measly 66,000. And there's been no shortage of alternatives offering that same in-person trade show aspect cropping up over the years. Gamescom in Germany has been raking in over 300,000 visitors since long before Jeff plopped a big stage show in front of it. The Taipei Game Show in Taiwan and Brazil Game Show in Brazil also saw similar crazy attendance figures, and then there's EGX, PAX, GDC, the list goes on. Even brand-specific conventions like QuakeCon, also going since 1996, and BlizzCon draw in plenty of punters, not to mention broader mainstream shows like Comic-Con or specialist events like the esports-focused DreamHack. The point is, E3 is no longer the gatekeeper for video game trade shows. There are plenty of opportunities for networking available for smaller publishers or indie studios, plenty of chances for journalists to attend previews or interviews, and plenty of demo space for the wider public to discover their next gaming obsession. And if there's one thing almost everyone learned from lockdown, it's how to conduct Zoom calls. We've come a long way since 1995, and going to a sweaty convention center in LA for a sleepless week of chaos isn't the only option anymore. Between downloadable demos for the public, online press events, PR conference calls, or good old-fashioned business emails, we think the industry will survive without E3, and the industry agrees. A wise woman once sang, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone." We're not sure whether E3 is truly finished yet, but this once proud institution of gaming is certainly on life support. COVID didn't help matters, but the writing's been on the wall for years. First Nintendo jumped ship, then Sony, and finally Microsoft and other publishers all opting to host their own shows instead. And it makes sense, as they were easier to plan, could fit into their own schedule, and almost certainly cost less than the expensive LA Convention Center. Other competition for trade shows and conventions started appearing in droves, some of which weren't hosted by Jeff Keighley Keighley, many of which were hosted by Jeff Keighley. And then we had the big shut-in of 2020, accelerating all of these factors through necessity. In many ways, E3 got too big for its own good and is paying the price now through a combination of bad luck, technological progress, and its own hubris. But is the end of E3 a good thing? For the industry, maybe. Moving with the times and not being held back by outdated notions is usually a good thing, and if we're honest, E3 hasn't been necessary for a while. But that doesn't stop us from being sad about all the things we'll miss. From the hype of a new reveal, the savage one-upmanship between console rivals, the unnecessary celebrity cameos, the awkwardness of on-stage developers, or the countless cringe moments and ludicrous performances. It was far from perfect, but that was part of its charm. Most of all, we'll miss that undeniable buzz around our video game Christmas and the snark. Just so much snark. They paved paradise and put up a dozen directs.